So last week was a bit hectic for all of us here. We had to visit the couple of industrial venues here in Bangalore. The specific requirement what they have is a pollution control liability insurance. Now it's a very specialized insurance policy wherein this policy is basically suited for all the chemical plants, e-waste recyclers, manufacturing units, wherein if they feel that pollution will affect the injury and it will affect the environment and that may arise the liability. And this is a very specialized policy which will cover all the liabilities which will arise because of the injury to the property or an environmental, and it also includes the cost of entire cleanup which might have to be done because of the pollution getting pollutants getting discharged into the environment. So it was a very interesting, and we visited the premises, and along with an underwriting team, we inspected the entire location, and it was very exciting. And this solution we are going to propose it, and we're going to take it forward. Now today in this session, I'm going to talk about a very important topic which is called as risk burdens. Okay, and primarily there are two risk burdens that we talk about. One is the primary burden of risk. Now what is risk here? Risk is a situation wherein the losses may occur or it may not occur. This we call it as a pure risk, right? Now what is a primary burden here? So primary burden, there are two types of burdens actually, primary and secondary. So first we'll talk about the primary burden of the risk. Now what is primary burden of the risk is, this is the one risk, if the losses occur, it can be measured, it can be quantified. So once it is measured and it can be quantified, it can be easily compensated. This I call it as the actual loss which will happen. Now for example, let's say there is a fire occurs in the manufacturing units, the entire losses can easily be quantified. And once it is quantified, it can be compensated very easily. And taking similar example, in a manufacturing unit, let's say there is a fire and there is a disruption in the business, and that can lead to the losses in the profits. The losses in the profits can easily be measured and it can be compensated by way of insurance. So one more example I will give you regarding the primary burden of risk is, let's say there is a heart attack and there is a surgery one has to undergo. The entire cost of the treatment can easily be measured and it can be quantified, and hence it can be always compensated. So the conclusion here is primary burden of risk is one which is the actual cost which will incur because of the person is exposed to loss situation. Okay, now people might heard about this only primary burden of risk, but on the other side there is also a secondary burden of risk. Now what is the secondary burden of risk? See, let's say the event might happen or it may not happen. So let's say if the event does not happen at all, I mean, does that mean that there is no losses for me? This is actually a primary loss, a primary burden of risk. Let's say if there is no losses happen, does that mean that there is no burden of risk on me? No, there still exists a burden of risk. That is what I call it as a secondary burden of the risk. Now what is secondary burden of risk is, see, one is exposed to certain amount of losses because of the exposures to the loss events, right? And in case if there is no adequate primary burden has not been taken care, or it has not been insured, or it has not been transferred, so what will happen here is one has to carry all the time the risk and the fear and anxiety. That anxiety and fear will all the time along with me, it will be there. And because of that, saying that I'm not adequately insured, the anxiety of not being adequate, not being having an adequate money, that always will be there, and that can affect your mental well-being. So hence it is important to take care of your primary burden of risk. Also it is important to take care of your secondary burden of risk. Now for example, let's say if it is not taken care, the primary burden, the compensation part is not taken care, then I will have to keep all the money aside. Let's say if there is a health event occurs, I have to keep all the money, some 10 lakh rupees or a 15 lakh rupees, always I have to keep it in my bank account, because if something happens, I'll have to take it from that investments. And that can also give you a situation wherein, since you are keeping that money all the time in the bank, that may cause that you might get a very less yield onto it. So what I am saying here is there are two types of the risk burden that we talk about. One is the primary burden. Primary burden is the actual cost of losses which will happen and which can be measured and it can be compensated. The secondary burden is the fear and anxiety that it will create, and that will bring in so much of strain on your overall well-being, saying that you don't have enough, and that may also carry a burden. That is also a kind of a burden that you carry, right? So hence it is very important to take a proper steps in transferring the risk. That is the best way of managing the risk. So I hope there lots of information has been given in this particular session, and I will assure you that I will come up with a whole stack of liability insurance policies which are available and which are offered normally by a non-life insurance companies, including officers and directors liability insurance policies. The whole stack of products in detail, there will be a session on this. Thank you so much.